Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would like to start with a question on your relation with Hindi and English. So why have you opted for writing in Hindi and not in English? And what is your personal linguistic and literary map of India?
Okay, I'm certainly going to answer that question in some detail, but I also want to be a little naughty. When you ask me why am I writing in Hindi and not English, I want to ask you, would you write in Polish or some other language?
Definitely Polish.
Right. So I think uh, the answer is obvious. I mean, Hindi is mother tongue, but I also know that we have a very special history, and that is why, everyone gets curious and wants to know why somebody who knows English, which is the most successful language, which is the language which will take them to a wider readership, why are they, if they know English, why are they not writing in that language? Why are they opting for some other language? So that has to do with the peculiar colonial history of India. So we have been, as you know, a colony of the British we were a colony of the British for a very long time. And in that time, English acquired a prominence and a primacy which was over and above the Indian languages. And that mentality has continued even in independent India. The British left and things might have changed, but I think another factor that came into the modern world is America. So I think again, English in a new way became a very prominent language. It's the language in which, the world now connects with each other, business connects with each other. It's the language of the multinationals who are actually ruling the world. So it's really a very powerful language. Now, that is fine. But what I think is objectionable is the hierarchy between languages. Otherwise, I think every language is wonderful and you can write in any language and there's no problem. So I think it's the hierarchy which is problematic. And when people have this kind of complex about not writing in English, then there is a problem. Or have a superiority complex about writing in English, then there's a problem. Otherwise, if one is doing it quite naturally, I have no prejudice against English, and I certainly love my own mother tongue. So, if I may also add here, I mean, something you haven't asked, but I can say that today, a lot of the writers who are writing in English have really turned English on its head. So it is not Queen's English that they are trying to follow, but they are bringing their own flavors into the language. So, Salman Rushdie, of course, is the most famous example of that, but even the younger generation and actually some writers before him also had already started using an English which was their own English, very much imbued with their own sense of language and culture. So I think we don't have to, speak against people who are writing in English. But now coming to my own personal self, why did I not choose that language? Now, my relationship with the two languages. See, I belong to the middle classes, and in the middle class, anyone who can afford to give their children a decent education wants them to go to English medium schools and colleges because that is where the better education still lies. So, of course, I also went to an English medium school, and that is why I learned English formally. That was the medium in which I got educated, which is in some ways, of course, strange, but that is what colonial history is all about. I think the advantage I had over and above the children of today is that I belong to the time soon after India got independence. And in 1947, it got independence, and I was born in the late 50s. So, what happened then is it was a time when there was a resurgence of India and what it stood for. And in that time, in my childhood, there was a lot of, I think, very healthy pride in re-owning and rediscovering our own languages, our own writers, our own culture. I mean, not a revivalism, that was also there, but also a very healthy reconnect. And I have grown up on that. So in my childhood, we read a lot of Hindi also, even though we went to English medium schools. Informally, I was being nicely educated in Hindi. So I read a lot of Hindi. I heard a lot of Hindi. And again, I mean, I think the Hindi I heard was more exciting because I heard it on many registers from classical programs where I heard the literary and the very good Hindi, educated Hindi, down to the street language, colloquial, buying mangoes from the street vendors. So all kinds of, different registers of the language. So it came inside me, I think, in a much more live and layered fashion. While the English I learned was mostly bookish and more formal. So, of course, I mean, I am reasonably coherent in English, but I think my Hindi is better. And then finally, when it comes to something like creative writing, I think we often don't quite make the choice ourselves. The choice is made for us. We start expressing ourselves in the language which is most personal and intimate to us. And Hindi is flowing in my blood and it's close to my heart and it's close to my bones. And it became just a very natural thing for me, spontaneous thing for me to write in Hindi.
Okay. So would you please tell us what maybe Hindi literature has to offer to readers from outside of India?
Well, not, that's a very large question. And it's a very large country we are talking about. So, not just Hindi, I think the languages in India have all kinds of literature being written, and there is um, great literature being produced, great literature which has already been produced in these languages and is not known because there's not enough translation. There's sometimes not enough interest. There's that also. And translation is difficult also. I mean, not enough push in that direction. So we don't really know what all is happening. But there is such a range of literature. I mean, don't forget that we are dealing with, I mean, I myself don't remember the number of languages in this country. I think 26 or 27 are officially recognized, big languages, but there are many other languages which are called dialects, and some are, fighting to be given the status of an official and a national language. All that is going on. But the point is that all these languages, most of them, have a very rich lineage, very long tradition of literature. So we are talking of very rich languages in which there has been a lot of creative and non-fictional also work already produced. And because we don't have translation, we just don't know about it, which is such a deprivation for the world. Within India also, I will say that the story of translation is not absolutely, satisfying. So we also don't know each other's literature as well as we should. So, ridiculous it will be. But I know the literature of some of the other languages in India, reading them in English rather than in an Indian language translation. So I think there are very lopsided developments which need to be, set right, and a lot more has to be done in these directions. I think, and I mean, about good literature, I think good literature is being produced in the most remote corners of the world as well. It is about discovering it. It is about, good literature in its specifics can be different, can sound different, but in its humanity, it is universal. So good literature makes sense anywhere in the world. And that is why, I mean, it would be great if more literature came out from India and became known to the world. The world will also be a richer place for that.
Very true. Right. I wanted to ask you about your take on women's writing and being perceived as a woman writer.
I have a very mixed take on that. I think as far as the politics, as far as gender politics is concerned, it is important to give an extra careful, alert, aware look towards women and see, because it's very easy not to recognize what women are doing. It's very easy to continue, what's the word, invisibilize them. It continue to invisibilize women, continue to marginalize them. So that has become part of the way of patriarchal societies. And most societies in the world are actually patriarchal. Even behind their very enlightened exterior, we know that even a lot of the so-called first world is also quite patriarchal. So I think it's important to give that attention to what women are doing. But as a literature person, I don't want any extra marks for being a woman or any kind of grace marks for being a woman. I'm a literature person, I'm a writer, man, woman, third gender, I'm a writer and I want to be seen at that level. So that's why I'm saying that I have to say both these things. At the level of gender politics, it is important, very important, to make the distinction between women writers and men writers. At the level of, the world of literature, we should be able to transcend gender and just judge the writer. So that is how I feel about being a woman writer. So I'm always a little uncomfortable when I'm put in a category of women writers. I'm happier if I'm put in the category of writers. But I also acknowledge that there is, that there is in the system a certain gaze, which continues, and we have to protest against it and we have to be alert towards it. Personally, I have not, as a writer, I have not suffered too much, I think. I mean, I have not suffered in any visible way for being a woman. I've actually had it quite good. So when I started writing, the publisher in Hindi, Rajkamal, who's a leading publisher in the Hindi world, Rajkamal was run by a very, very powerful woman, Sheila Sandhu. Okay, she was really sort of post-independence entrepreneur. She rose. So she was one of those. So she is the one who took me on and encouraged me. So it was a story already, which was able to, just stood as powerfully as a powerful man might. So I think, and I had it good. My books came out quite early. My publishing, I mean, I started late, but once I sent it to the publisher, my work started coming out quite regularly and quite early. And within the Hindi world, I was given a reasonable place, and I don't think I was discriminated against for being a woman. However, I think there is, like I said, I'm repeating, there is a systemic gaze which we can't always catch, you know. So I think that applies often, the mainstream will look at women's writing in a certain way and not all, it'll take sometimes a bit longer to acknowledge anything which is like a path breaker, in women's writing, it'll notice that it'll take a bit longer to acknowledge that that kind of thing will happen. Or it, how quickly they can say, oh, such and such woman writer is using obscenity to promote her work, using obscenity and bold language to make herself popular. They never say that about male writing, which has been, bloody obscene and bold for ever. So it's like, it's those very nuanced and subtle things which do continue. But I think we also have to realize that women have in these fields, I don't think it's we can say in everything, but in a lot of these fields, women are actually a very, very unshakable presence. I mean, look in literature, in literature, films, theater. I think look at the number of women who are now prominent. Look at the number of women who, make a name and are great writers. So I think that is something to be really acknowledged. Yeah. Even as I'm sure you and I will both agree that I go to so many reading tours, and I always notice that the audience is more women than men. I think that's a very common thing. So there are all these things which say something about how the world still operates. you know. And yet, I would say that women are a presence to be reckoned with today.
So now maybe let's talk a little bit about your book about Red Samadhi. How important is transgressing borders, boundaries, limitations in the lives of the protagonists of the novel? And also how important it is for them and for you as a writer to revisit the traumatic experience of the partition of India, in particular in today's world, which is continuously torn by wars and conflicts.
Well, that's a very complex question. I hope I can address everything. If I forget, you must ask me again. Um, about borders, a writer writes so much intuitively without consciously thinking about everything. But my having to speak about my work, my having to try and explain my work, which I think writers are not always good at that. And in fact, they should not try, they often ruin it. But, but that exercise actually made me realize how much borders figure in my work, the need to transgress borders. And I thought to myself, it's a discovery for me. It's a self-discovery for me that actually borders are very important in our lives. I think borders are trying to hem us in all kinds of ways, and we are all trying always to cross that border. There is importance, even in trying not to repeat something. We can only do it by not staying within the confines of what has already been given to us. We have to cross that to be able to do something different. So I think borders are like a challenge which we face all the time in our lives in all sorts of ways, and we always want to cross that. That this is what you are about, you must stay like this, but no, we want to be more. This is what language is about, this is how you express, but no, we want to open it up and express it even better. So I think borders has that kind of wonderful sort of stimulating quality, that it challenges you to push and not let it become a prison, but become something which will open up and you actually keep pushing the borders further and further and further, and you keep opening up. So it's a constant process, I think, continuous process, and it's very exciting. So from my first book, I think from my on to many of my stories, there's always this thing of, not being content to be in the confines of what's been imposed on us. Always wanting to discover what's beyond. What happens if you push the border? What happens if you break the border? And I think that is where the most exciting things begin to happen. So I think borders are certainly important in that way. And like I said, I discovered it when I had to hear about my writing so much, when I had to think about my writing so much, then I discovered it that yes, this is something which goes on inside me such a lot. Perhaps it goes on in women quite a lot, maybe much more than in many other kinds of people. Maybe it's very important for women because they are the ones who have to deal with so many borders. So it becomes something very important for them to understand those borders, question them, and cross them and discover, widen their world, expand their world. And I think my writing is constantly trying to do that. So when we come to Ret Samadhi, I would say that it wasn't a conscious, process. I didn't think that I'm going to write about a novel about crossing borders. I didn't think that when I started. And in fact, like many writers, you don't even know what all is going on inside you, what all is getting ready to become a story. You're picking up stories all the time from around you. I mean, so many things go into the making of a work, a creative work, so many things. You can't even list them all. But it's your experience, it's other people's experience, it's history, it's memory, it's dream. So many things just come together and a work begins to concretize. So I had no clear agenda that this is what I'm going to do. But it is obviously something which was, there inside me, and, it was taking shape and waiting to show its shape. And when I started the work, my way of writing is usually to let something small get me started. So that I don't always choose. I let it happen. So something small, something very ordinary, something very daily just sets me off. And once it is set off, then the stories which are, inside me, dormant, the stories which are flitting around me, those start finding their way into the work and, make their own connections and fitting and shape, and it goes on like that. So that is how I started this work with just the back of the woman,
Mhm.
an elderly woman whose back is to the world, and it is like she's not interested in living. And that is the stereotype which stayed with me. And then that was already a border which was, I think, a challenge. So is it a closed back? Is the story finished? That back is it. She's finished. Her story is over. Is that it? Or something else is happening there? Something else is going on there. Is that wall which she's pushing herself into just a wall which imprisons her? Or is it something she's trying to break through? So, this started happening very naturally, very organically. And when this happened, then the stereotype slowly began to change. She was no longer a woman who was not interested in life anymore. She became a woman who was actually very interested in life, but a new life, another life. And she broke that stereotype at the border of that stereotype, and she became a woman who was full of zest and enthusiasm, and discovered herself, rediscovered herself, reinvented herself, and a new life began in which she was constantly crossing borders. So when this became her innate nature, it developed in the dynamic of writing the story. When that became her innate nature, then it was absolutely natural at some point for her to also cross the great border between India and Pakistan. And that became part of the story as well. Now, coming to your asking how important is that? See, I'm from North India. So, particularly for all of North India, right from across, from the east to the west, from Punjab right to Bengal on the other side, and all of North India, UP and Kashmir and everywhere, the partition has a major role to play. And some people say it's over and finished. Why talk about it? But it's not, because it has continued to scar and crack and hurt psychologies. And people continue to be, part this side and part that side, in sad ways and in vicious ways. So we see all kinds of ramifications of this division, of this border, which should be, the border should have been there just as a convenience. But it became like Gandhi used to say, that now you wanted to become two nations, now you become two nations. Why are you fighting now? You got what you wanted. But the fight continues. And other uses have crept in. I mean, it's also used for all kinds of other things. And, so many things. It just continues to be something very live and something which is fitting into a new world, which is all about suspicion, all about divisions, all about, hatred. And I always say, and I repeat this again and again, that this is not just the partition of India Pakistan that we're talking about. I mean, look at the world. I mean, divisions seem to have become such a big thing suddenly. People who have lived side by side, maybe with tensions also. I mean, it happens in the family also. But, it didn't become such a grave thing always that you just cannot bear each other and you cannot see the other as a human being with the same, needs and same rights. And it's become all about a lot of toxic, values, all about negativity, all about just, widening the gap rather than closing the gap. So I think it's become a very, very relevant and sad subject in today's time.
Very true. I also wanted to ask you about the language of the novel, which is very playful, layered, witty, full of all sorts of word plays, puns, verses from various texts of culture, Bollywood songs, ghazals, and whatnot. So the Hindi of Red Samadhi flows, jumps, takes deep dives, and sometimes also it drags on purposefully. That's what I think. Well, I think that this fluidity of language, its kind of shape-shifting capacity, reflects this transgression of boundaries we were discussing a while ago, where nothing seems as it is. I think this is something I heard you saying in one of the conversations that I heard previously. So how writing this novel was different or similar to your other works?
Monica, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, because I think that's for readers will probably have a better idea of how different or how similar the works are. I actually feel that all my works are quite different from each other. But I think some readers have told me that there are certain things which, they can recognize as my signature. So it must be happening. But, I'm not an expert on that. But again, talking about this shape shifting, I think once the novel had found its tone and its way of moving forward, I think this became like the language it chose, where nothing was just what it looked like. That was not all it was. It was always much more also. There were things which were unsaid also. It was all quite ephemeral also. So, that became I think, just the truth of the novel, and in everything that it did, whether it was language, whether it was genre. Is it going to be academic, discursive? Is it going to be fiction? Is it going to be serious? Is it going to be nonsense? I think I think at every point there was this, either a prankster who felt that, no, why should it just be this, and would jump out of that, and make it something else. So that became really, it gave the energy to the novel, you know. I think one of the things we often tend to forget when we talk about literature, because the main ingredient in literature is, or main tool, shall we say, is words. And words are something that we convey and relay our meanings and our messages through. So when we talk of literature, we almost always only talk about the message and the meaning of the words. While in fact, I think literature is also a lot of other things. It's also a lot of play, for instance. It's dance and music, and it's jumping around in ways which should be aesthetic, which should have an aesthetic truth to it. So, but it's not just about meanings and messages. So I think there was a lot of play in this novel. Of course, there were lots of serious messages. There was a lot of, mood. I mean, through the humor, there was a lot of sadness, I think, a sadness about um, uh, a world order which is collapsing, and the kinds of things that are happening around us. So all that was there. But there was everything had to be said very playfully. That was the way it found to express itself. And that is where, whether it was language, whether it was anything else, it just kept, breaking borders, breaking boundaries, and doing other things. Again, I would say also refer to the fact, I mean, this is true, I think, for the world, this is true for everybody, but it's true par excellence for India, that we are a multicultural country. We are a polyphonic, sort of country. We are a pluralistic society. So, my whole life, I mean, I'm exposed all the time to many languages. I mean, living in Delhi, I'm listening to people from, Gujarat, from Punjab. I mean, I'm picking all that up also. I'm picking, Orissa. I mean, people have come from everywhere and settled around. And, one is listening to all those languages. Then my own upbringing and education has exposed me to so many dialects and languages. Hindi is a language which is anyway, made up of so many languages. All this, made it a very pluralistic kind of expression, just coming into the book. And I think I always say that this book is uh, quite an amazement even to me, because it just kept even happening. So I think that is actually the most exciting part about the creative process, that you may think anything, you may have any plan, but the thing which will do it is some mysterious energy which you don't know where it comes from, and it sparks everything. And without that, spark and that energy, you may have everything right. It'll not work.
Mm.
So that this book just kept happening. I mean, the crows, for instance, I'm always amazed. Where did they come in from? Never thought, I mean, obviously never had crows in my life who came to the tree outside and hung saris there, but they started doing it in the novel. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Right. So Red Samadhi is the epic like no other. It is polyphonic. You were speaking about it right now, to such an extent that non-sentient beings are also given voice and turn into narrators and protagonists of the novel. So like chrysanthemums, doors, etc., etc. So it seems to me that this universe created by you is a kind of a radical democracy. Um,
Wonderful.
well, and to me, it seems like it's a kind of a political commentary also, a very subtle and a very
Yeah,
nuanced political
yeah,
commentary to what is happening in the world globally, not only in India.
yes.
Would you like
Yes.
to say something on that?
Monica, I really love the way you have put it. I think, I mean, I really am grateful to have readers like you. Really, I mean, it's so gratifying to hear, this kind of um, understanding of the work. So I really am so happy that I don't even know if I can say very much more, but thank you, first of all, for that. But going back to what you say, well, I'm lost it. I was so moved by what you said. Just say it again. I mean, let me try and get back to it.
So,
Lost
so
it.
yeah, well, when I was reading it for the first time and for the second time, and now reading it also while we were doing the translation, it was amazing to hear all those voices which are somewhere there, but we never pay attention to them. Like,
Mhm.
this was kind of a freeing experience that,
Yes, 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 yes,
that everything can communicate with
yes,
you
yes, yes, yes.
as a reader
Okay.
and a person who
Yes.
participates in,
And you said that it was you also said that this is kind of politics in a subtle way.
yeah, yes.
So I think it's politics also in an unintended way. It's sort of there in me. It's a kind of in me. I don't represent just myself. I'm also talking about the voice I represent, the kind of people I represent, you and me. For instance, it's your voice too. So it's our politics that we somewhere. I think there is discomfort at the arrogance of man, or at arrogance, where um, man is the master and everything else is controlled and manipulated and, like puppets by the man. And I think it tries to restore another kind of world where things are in communication, and it's not about one being about being the master who's controlling everybody. Everyone else is just a circus, and they are jumping up and down to the master, pulling the strings. And I think that is what it was doing, and therefore everything acquired a soul, acquired its own voice, which also contributed to the reality or whatever was happening. So the chrysanthemums have a role to play. The door and the road and the birds and everything, they have a role to play. They are not just something inanimate in your hands or something powerless in your hands. I mean, you are also only one of the players. So everyone's a player out here, and you are also only one of the player. Come down from that delusion, state of
Mhm.
self delusion that you put yourself in. So I think that is also a political thrust of the novel, but obviously not in a direct way. I mean, it's all very subtly woven in. Yeah.
True. So maybe, yeah, that would be maybe one of the last questions. And thank you for being so patient with me. Well,
Thank you for the wonderful, thought processes that you have set in motion. Great.
though you were a recognized writer before the Booker happened, I believe that it must have widened your exposure to international readership and also to the global book market. So what are your observations on that?
Well, I mean, when you say you were already a recognized writer, so I mean, I obviously belonged to a smaller world earlier, the Hindi world, which is quite vast, but still small. It is just the Hindi world. Um, and yes, indeed, the Booker, by kind of shedding light on me, or suddenly bringing me on stage, it propelled me into the world in a way which was completely new and different. And the wonderful thing about it is that my world expanded and my world of books and literature expanded. So I'm back with writers and readers and people, who love books. And really, what can be better and what can be more meaningful in today's world? I mean, the way art and literature join people is something quite amazing and wonderful. So I think it really gave a lot of beauty, to me, and it extended, that world for me. And I'm very, very happy that I was the lucky one, who on whom the light fell. So all that is wonderful. But I must also say that, look, I mean, a writer cannot really, I mean, you cannot make this the point which will make life meaningful or not, or make happiness meaningful or not, that how big your world is. I mean, I think suppose it hadn't become so big, I would still have been writing with as much commitment and sincerity as I will continue to do even now. And I will not do it more because of the Booker. I will do it because this is my way of life, to respond um, creatively to the world inside me and outside me and express that. So whether I was stuck in just this much of a space or whether it was going to be a vast, wide world, I will continue, I hope, the same way with the same honesty and sincerity and attempt to just do it as well as I can. But coming to serious things like, has it changed things for Hindi literature, for South Asian languages and literature? I think it has certainly, uh, f- excited people, and there is a lot more talk about it. But you would know it perhaps better than me. Has it at the moment really changed, for instance, the perception of the West towards literature from the East? I'm I'm not sure. I think the literature from the East still has quite a small place in the uh, in the perception of the West and in the market, which unfortunately has become such a powerful player in today's world. So I think that still continues in spite of the fact that more attention has been focused on these other languages. So I think there in that direction, if much more sustained activity and interest and support networks, and publishers and translators and fundraisers would make a movement out of this,
Mhm.
that we must go to other literatures and other languages, then it would be so wonderful.
Yeah, and let's hope that. Let's hope for that. And I think we are in the process. We definitely are in the process.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful.
Yeah. So I would
Great.
just like to ask you one last question.
Yes.
If I may, what are you working on right now?
Yeah. I have a novel, Monica, that it's almost finished. And in fact, it is finished. And yes, but I had to leave it because of all the traveling and because of all the events that have come in. So I'm trying now to be quietly with it for a few months.
Mhm.
Just look at it again and be very quiet and do a little bit of editing and tinkering if necessary. And I'm waiting for that inner voice to say, enough, let it go, free it. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful news. So we are all eagerly waiting for this one to be published in Hindi first, and then hopefully in other languages.
Yes, hopefully in Polish. Yeah.
And I do hope that next time we meet, it will be in Poland once your book is out, the Polish translation of Red Samati.
That is great.
And it would be
I'll
wonderful to share a cup of tea with you.
That'd be great. That'd be so nice. I really I'm very happy to have met you, but yes, it'll be lovely to meet in person as well.
Thank